When it comes down to Neptunia spin-off games, this is actually a pretty dang good game. That said, the Neptunia spin-off games don't exactly set a very high bar. Michael here with an impressions review of Cyberdimension Neptunia 4 Goddesses Online, which contrary to the name being online, it's not actually an online game. It does have an online mode, however it's botched for 99% of players, but it is primarily a single-player game focused for Neptunia fans. If you're not a Neptunia fan, you're going to find that the game lacks a lot of content. Even if you are a Neptunia fan, you're going to find that the game lacks a lot of content because when it comes down to gameplay variety, there's not a lot of areas or a lot of enemies or a lot of skill variety here and there, and obviously talk about that a little bit later. But when it comes down to the story as well, there is a mainline sort of story, but there's not a lot to it and not a lot of depth. And there's sort of like a two-arc thing going on, which is kind of cool. But if you don't care about the Neptunia characters, mostly what the story focuses on is these small side stories. It's like talking about the characters and what they do or elaborating on things in previous games, which as a Neptunia fan, that's pretty dang cool. I kind of like seeing that, and it is very lighthearted in the way they tell the story because it is taking place within an MMO. And if you know anything about the Neptunia franchise is talking about video games. It's all based on like the video game industry and stuff like that. So you're playing a game within a game that's referencing a game, and the game within the game is actually referencing another game because the beta to a new game within the game franchise. It's a mess and I absolutely love it. But for the most part, you're gonna find that if you're not a Neptunia fan, it's actually pretty content bare and there's not a lot to it. That said though, what is there is actually pretty dang fun. And if you're a Neptunia fan looking for a serious story, you're not gonna get it. But you are gonna get some elaborations on characters, and it is kind of got that Neptunia humor, which is more of what most of us want anyway. So just keep in mind that the story really isn't centric here, and neither is the gameplay. It just lacks a lot. But anyways, I'll talk about that a little bit later. First off, let's go ahead and talk about PC-specific stuff. If you don't care about this stuff, go ahead and skip ahead because I'll talk about gameplay and story and stuff like that afterwards. So first off, we got our DLC. I don't know if this game has DLC or if I bought any. I don't think I did. But anyway, so here's the DLC options. This is what comes with the game, I think. And I turned off the item sets because they're like beginner helper stuff. But when you turn these on and off, you have to reboot the game, which is a little bit annoying, but not that big of a deal. I think a configuration here. Performance-wise, I've actually had some fairly decent performance in this game up until I had some driver issues recently. And so when we start up the game, there is a high likelihood that we're gonna running into some stuttering here and there, and that's gonna affect my capture as well. I have some driver issues with my capture setup, which is a little bit annoying. So it's gonna affect my footage here and there. And this is one of the reasons why I haven't been recording lately. I just haven't had time to fix it. So keep in mind that that's probably gonna be a problem, but hopefully it won't do it. Hopefully. But anyways, going into the actual performance stuff like that, I only had one performance problem within the game, and that was when there was too many particle effects, especially in the later game. You end up getting all these buffs and things like that kind of stack, and they have visual effects. And when you end up getting all these particle effects, it doesn't seem like the game is using my full system's potential, and it seems to be something they ended up programming into the game. But regardless, when we actually go into the PC settings and stuff like that, it is capped at 60 FPS, so that's a little bit unfortunate, and the window size and stuff like that is capped at 16:9. So if you're running at any other resolution other than 16:9, you're either going to get black borders or you're going to be stuck into a windowed mode, which is a little bit unfortunate. But here we'll actually get window size. You can't really see it because I'm in borderless, which just sets it to max resolution. If you actually want to change your render resolution, go ahead and change the screen resolution, which it doesn't actually explain what any of these settings are, which actually carries throughout the entire menu, which is super, super annoying, especially when we get into like distance. Like there's a distance setting here, which is actually render distance, but then there's a distance setting here, which is camera distance. They don't explain that anywhere, and so I actually set this to 5, and then when you start the tutorial, which you can't access the menu during the tutorial, I'll talk about the tutorial stuff for a second as well, because the tutorial is kind of buggy here and there. I didn't have any problems with it, other than I couldn't access the menu to change the camera distance, because I set it to 5, thinking it might be render distance or enemy distance or something, and it ended up being camera distance, so I had to play the entire tutorial, which is like the first hour of the game, completely zoomed out, which is a little bit annoying. But anyways, going back into this, screen resolution actually changes the render resolution, so you can actually get a nice crisp UI without changing your window resolution or whatever. And so you can actually get a nice crisp UI while actually reducing the render resolution of the game, which actually makes it very performance friendly. Anti-aliasing, again, we don't know what kind this is. I just have everything on max because, again, the game has been running perfectly fine. And then you have distance, which is render distance, shadows, texture, which is actually high quality textures. If you turn this off, it won't just turn off textures, which would be hilarious if it did. I would love to have an option like that. But when you end up turning this off, it just makes it so it's using low quality textures instead of the normal textures. And then you get effects. Again, doesn't explain what these are. Post processes, if you turn it off on 2, it'll actually turn off the outline borders and things like that. And so you can actually turn that down. But it also, again, it turns off a bunch of other effects like a bloom and things like that. And I hate it when they end up kind of bundling these all into. I understand why, because it's done in Unreal Engine 4. But at the same time, it's a little bit annoying. And then VSync is on because on my system, tearing is absolutely terrible. I need to get a G-Sync monitor at some point. Then you want to go to single sliders, you get multiple volume sliders, which is super nice. I only had to turn down the background music because during the story segments, it doesn't actually adjust the music volume, and the music is extremely loud in this game for whatever reason. I don't know if that's system specific, but I had to turn that down. And you get button configuration. You actually can rebind everything on the mouse and keyboard side of things. It does say keyboard, but that does include the mouse as well. The default bindings are alien, just like any other Japanese port. So expect to change these to your liking. And it is set up so that you mostly use the keyboard, but you can use the mouse as well for the camera and stuff like that. It just doesn't have that option here. As for the gamepad, you can't rebind everything. You can rebind most of the buttons, but you can't rebind things like skills or movement, which is a little bit unfortunate, especially if you're using some sort of bizarre controller and stuff like that. Which is a little bit unfortunate, especially since the other Neptunia games have it. But again, it's not something I really expect out of games yet. So yeah, it's just a little bit unfortunate. And then you get your game settings, such as the display, so render or your camera distance. Keep in mind, this is camera distance, not render distance. Then you get direction. I have no clue what this does. Again, they need to explain what these are. Diminish actually just means smaller, so I have everything on smaller because I'm using a large monitor. And then you have or a high resolution monitor, sorry. And then you have minimap rotation and stuff like that. And then etc. You get autosave, which is nice to be able to turn off and on. I should have had it off, but I have it on. Then you get your inverting controls, and you get your speed, which is actually your text speed for like visual novel elements into the game, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Vibration settings, which is super nice to see on PC. Your language settings, it has Chinese as well, which is actually super cool. You get your Japanese and your English, and for voice acting, you also get English and Japanese. I prefer the English voice acting, but they're both done fairly dang well. One thing to note about the English voice acting is they did change Noir's voice actor, which I think was for the better. Some people might disagree, but I actually like this voice actor a lot better, and she does a fantastic job doing it. And I hope they kind of keep her for future games, but we'll end up seeing how that ends up going. And of course, if you like your Japanese voices, then freaking go for it. You can have subtitles, like these will change your subtitles as well. So if you want Japanese subtitles, go on Japanese. If you want English subtitles, use English, which is super nice, which isn't a feature in the other games. So yeah, that's actually super cool to see. Anyways, no, I don't want to save my settings because I wasn't trying to change anything. So that's the kind of configuration. So that other people have ended up bringing up some other issues. For example, when you end up changing the costume in the game, it can cause some performance issues. And when I was trying to record this previously, I had to restart my recording because it actually crashed my recording. So I won't be entering that menu because I don't know if that's like a problem with the game right now. I am having driver issues, like I was saying. So my drivers are screwing up and I opened that menu and it crashed out and bugged. And so I won't be entering that menu, but do keep in mind, there are some minor things that people are having in specific times, and I don't know how to fix all of those. So your performance is going to vary. But anyways, let's go ahead and go into the game. Also, on low-end machines, there are certain areas that have been crashing as well. So don't expect to run it perfectly on low-end machines. Expect to have some issues and turn down your settings if you can't run it fine. Because people are able to run this on some pretty weak systems. So I'm going to go ahead and load into my game here, which is actually only 15 hours in, and I have completed the main story. There's still a ton of content that I can play through. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it does, it's not a very long game, especially if you're just looking for the main story. People are saying it only takes about 20 hours to complete everything in the game, so I'm pretty dang far. But again, I've gotten like 15 to 20 hours out of my gameplay, so that's pretty good for me. Well, let's go ahead and load into here. Keep in mind, there's going to be some minor cameo spoilers here and there for characters that show up and stuff, which it shows it like the trailers of that, so it's not that big of a deal. But if you want to be completely blind on that, I don't know how you're going to fix that on any review that you're going to look at, especially in this style. Anyway, so here we are in the main hub. So you actually go around, you get your little characters and stuff like that. So for example, if I go on here, you get your just between you and me, but the Jet Black Fallen Angels is a pretty embarrassing name. They just say stupid things, and some things are related to story and stuff like that. I've completed the game, and so I'm not going to be reading out anything like that, and I'm going to be avoiding most of the text. But you do get your little story segments as well here and stuff like that. Most of them are on the field, but you also get to talk to people on here. So for example, Princess is sitting here, and she has a little exclamation point above them. That's how they end up doing the story stuff. So blue means that it's a side story, and so there's still side story after you complete the main campaign. So it's not like you're completely done with story stuff. And the game actually focuses mostly on side stories, but I'll talk about that a little bit later once we go over gameplay and stuff like that. One thing about the multiplayer is here's how you access multiplayer is the bulletin board. So you actually go in here, and if I go into create a room, I don't know if anybody's going to be playing this online, probably not. But if I go to quest, you actually see there's a bunch of different quests, and these are actually like little maps and stuff like that specifically for online multiplayer. Now you can access these completely offline. You can actually access these in single player by yourself. You don't have to be connected online. So it's not like they're locking you out of content, but the multiplayer mode has no lag compensation whatsoever. Therefore, if your friend or whoever you're joining has a larger latency than 12 milliseconds or something along those lines, like super low, you are going to experience stuttering. Now, I fortunately was able to go in and actually find a few multiplayer rooms that weren't like that, and it actually ran perfectly fine. So if you're not having any lag issues whatsoever, then it might work, like if you have a LAN setup or something like that. Otherwise, completely abandon multiplayer. Don't even worry about it. But anyways, here on our hub, you also get a bunch of different shops, such as PR's Emporium. You're able to do all the standard RPG stuff. So you get all your items and things like that. So you can buy a bunch of different items. You can buy weapons, armor, costumes, accessories, and you can change your accessories whenever you want. You get gems and things, which act as kind of like an accessory, and some of them affect your stats and stuff like that. You also get materials in this game, which you use to upgrade items and things like that. So cameo from Tamsoft here. You're able to strengthen your weapons and things like that, going into more of the in-depth stuff. I won't go too in-depth on this, but you're able to go through, and some of the materials are only collectible through bosses, and you actually unlock new bosses and areas by going into the guild. And this is where the main quest line kind of comes into play. So you actually get a bunch of different guild ranks, and when you actually have a new quest, you actually click on it, it'll be like new quest. But yeah, for example, here it's like go and collect dangerous quests or whatever. So I can actually go to report quest if you actually have any finished. But if I go in my start menu, which you can access anywhere, including in the gameplay and stuff like that, you can change tactics and things like that. But you actually go down to quests, and you can see I have a freak ton of quests. This game is full of them, and there are a bunch of different little objectives like kill this many enemies, go kill a special boss. And the interesting part about this is how they end up doing progression, including main story progression. And so as you're completing quests, you will unlock more and more quests, and you will unlock new dungeon kind of areas, and you will unlock harder bosses on previous areas and level up enemies on previous areas. The game doesn't have a difficulty setting, and so you'll probably end up over leveling and just, you know, end up plowing through enemies and stuff like that. But I thought that was fairly interesting, and the story, for the most part, ends up focusing on these little side stories. So you'll end up finding characters on the main plaza, and you'll end up talking to them, and they'll be like, oh, hey, I need to go to this area. So yeah, anyways, I finished the game, so here's all the areas in the game. Sorry if there's a spoiler or whatever, but you don't really get a large selection. It is pretty content bare, but let's go ahead and go to the Yar Forest, which I'm gonna hope there's no performance problems at the moment. I am really worried about these driver issues affecting my recording. So if this recording cuts out and stuff like that, I apologize for that. I hope it doesn't happen, but it might. But for now, this is the standard performance I end up getting for the most part. It's fairly smooth, solid 60, pretty much everywhere. But this is one of my favorite areas. It's one of the prettier areas that shows off a lot of the detail that this game goes into. But when it goes into gameplay, you're actually able to walk around, you get free movement, you can jump, and you can also block, dodge, and attack, and you get a bunch of different skills. You're able to walk around and collect items. There's also chests and stuff like that. So for example, here's a chest I haven't gotten, and I got fairy feathers, which is an accessory. So yeah, you could actually go through and do all that. And I did mention this menu is actually accessible, so you can actually change the AI and stuff like that. Most of this is pretty useless, to be honest. Most of it really doesn't mean much, but you can actually make it so your characters, because you can actually change your character whenever you want. And so let's say you want them to not use all your special abilities. So let's say I wanted to change my playable character to Uni, or I wanted to change Uni to like Blanc or something like that. I can just change them whenever I want, and they'll actually change during combat as well. And so if I wanted to go through and change those, I can. So let's say a character ends up falling down, for example, you'll actually just go ahead and swap over characters, which is actually pretty dang cool. But going into other gameplay stuff, you actually get your skills and things like that. Here's some of the visual stuttering I was talking about, which is going to be super annoying. I super apologize for that, and I don't know how to skip it. When I'm not recording, it doesn't do it, so I'm not going to say it's a problem with the game, but it does seem like the recording is botching the game a little bit, which is a little bit annoying. Hopefully it doesn't crash this time. But yeah, you get a bunch of different skills. My favorite one is this one on Neptune, because you just literally walk forward and just spin, and so you can go through areas pretty dang quickly. Now, since I am at the end game, I am going to be mostly one-shotting these enemies. I will go into an area later in the game to where it shows off some of the more tougher enemies and bosses and things like that. But you are mostly going to be running around just kind of auto-attacking things. And while the skill variety is actually fairly decent, one of the reasons I'm playing Neptune right now is because you can actually get different skill slots. And so, for example, you get a bunch of different items you can use, like healing items and stuff like that. And you actually set those by going into your items and then selecting these, and you actually get a little thing. It's a little bit unintuitive, so to actually reset it, I have to hit X to reset those, and then I add them to my slot or whatever, which is a little bit annoying, but it's whatever. It's just kind of one of the little polished quirks that they actually have. Like, the UI in this game is not particularly great. It functions for what it needs to do, but it's not particularly amazing. But gameplay-wise, you get a bunch of different skills and stuff like that, and Neptune specifically is a paladin, so she gets a bunch of different spells and stuff like that, and a healing skill as well, which is super nice. So she has a nice variety, and a lot of the different characters kind of have a lot of different skills, and a lot of the different skills that you end up unlocking, like if I go into my skill set here, you can actually change them at any point in time as well. So you actually see you get a bunch of different skills and stuff like that, but some of them are just kind of like advanced versions. For example, you know, the fire spells that I have, the fire spell that I have, this one just shoots out a bunch of different fireballs. The beginner one is just like a single fireball that shoots out, and so later on you unlock a better one. And so that also carries over to the other skills. So for example, this Blade Rush one, at the beginning of the game, I unlocked one that was just like 2 slashes instead of 3 or 4 or whatever. Yeah, this one's 4 or or 5 actually. And so you unlock kind of previous ones that are better and better. Now I think I have all the skills unlocked at level 75, which is where I ended up landing at the end of the game. At some point, I did end up running into a situation where I was just like, all right, cool. I'm just kind of gonna play on one set of characters because I did kind of get bored of like switching characters and trying to keep their levels even and stuff like that, because the game really doesn't have a point to it. When it comes down to enemy variety, most of the enemies just run at you or sit there and cast spells, and so the AI is not particularly great, and that carries over to your AI companions as well. They just kind of follow you, and they get really floaty and stuttery every once in a while, and sometimes they'll get stuck on walls and things, which is super, super annoying, especially in boss fights, and they don't necessarily know how to dodge at the right time. Sometimes they'll block right, and in most boss fights, they actually survive pretty dang well, but you'll find out in some of the later levels and stuff like that, they do just kind of die on you, which is a little bit annoying. And so sometimes, especially in some of the tougher boss fights, especially since I did rush through some of the game, especially later into the game, I did end up rushing into where they just would end up getting one shot or whatever, and so I was just like, all right, cool, and I just play without them basically and just one-on-one the boss, which was perfectly fine. It just took a little bit longer. So you can end up doing that. There is no way to turn off party members without getting them killed though, so if I wanted this character like off, it doesn't necessarily work. There's also a bunch of quick keys and stuff like that I never use, so like swap to leader and stuff like that, which I never use those. But there you go. To kind of show off some variety, I guess I should probably switch characters and stuff like that just to show off. I'll show off Rom. She's cool. She's a samurai. Now, when it comes down to actually like story and characterization and stuff like that, there's not a lot of in-depth mechanics. Like there is a just guard as well. Like you can guard and dodge and stuff like that. So the dodge actually adds in some variety and stuff like that. I'm not going to be able to use it all that much here because, you know, again, it doesn't really have that much depth to it when you're actually over leveled, just because you just kind of one-shot everything. But when we actually get into the boss, maybe I'll be able to show it. But when it comes down to the characterizations and the story stuff like that, can I go in here? Thank you. When it comes down to the characterizations and stuff like that, you can also lock onto enemies as well, which I didn't mention. They actually have a decent variety because all the characters are kind of mixing up their roles and stuff like that. And so characters that are normally like spellcasters and stuff like that are playing things like melee characters and stuff like that. And I'm seeing if I can get a just guard here, and I'm massively screwing it up. Also, this boss is about to die. Can you attack so that I can block? I suck at it apparently on this boss. Whatever, he's dead. But the interesting part about it is it's kind of nice to see them kind of variety into those characters. So you see characters inside roles they're not normally in. And to go back to the lobby, you just go into any of these, and so we'll go back to the town or whatever. But it's nice to see all the characters kind of mix up their roles because you actually get a lot of variety within that. And so I'll go ahead and go into one of the later areas. I'll go into this one. Sorry if this is considered spoilers. Here's one of the later areas of the game. These guys will be a little bit tougher and stuff like that, so they'll take a little bit more of a hit. But yeah, so it's nice to have that variety because it also adds in a nice bit of gameplay variety. So for example, all the melee characters kind of act a little bit differently, and there's a surprising amount of variety to all the skills and stuff like that. Most of it is mostly you're going to be sitting here just attacking things, especially when your SP runs low. When you use skills, it does use SP. And so you're going to be sitting here being like, oh god, that actually hurt. There we go. There was a just guard. Yeah, I did one. When you get into tougher enemies, it's actually a little bit more fun to go into. One of my complaints of the game is the fact that it does get a little bit too easy, especially early on. Oh god. Well, I just got wrecked. Well, I just ended up reviving. Rom's a little under-leveled because I didn't use her in the later bit of the game, but yeah, if you just guard, you actually nullify all of it. So if you actually go into areas and don't level up a character, you can actually get some nice enjoyment, and you can actually rely on some of these skills to actually survive, because otherwise, you're going to be taking a ton of damage. But if you end up focusing on upgrading your materials or upgrading your armor and stuff like that, it's not really that big of a deal. And so, again, once you end up running out of SP, you're just sitting here auto-attacking enemies. And when it gets into some of the later bosses in the game, you end up running into a situation to where they just have a ton of health, but they're not challenging. And there's a lot of situations to where, like in the previous dungeon, for example, I was just sitting there dealing or getting dealt 0 damage over and over again and really didn't run into any problems fighting whatsoever. Did I? Oh, I haven't really swapped up her skills, so I don't really know exactly what she has. Also, all my party members are dying. Jesus Christ. I'll switch to somebody else. I'll switch to Ram. She has a thing that she throws. She's a ninja. Yeah, so there's a nice variety in gameplay-wise, but most of the time you're going to be sitting here just auto-attacking and then using skills for your damage and stuff like that. There is some more in-depth stuff, so for example, if I end up locking onto it... Oh, he died. If I end up locking onto a character, for example, you'll notice that it actually has a break meter, which is in other Neptunia games as well. And so if you end up breaking that, they'll get stunned and they'll take additional damage. And so that's actually pretty relevant to some of the tougher enemies, especially the metal dogus. and some of the later bosses that have a ton of health, because you'll be focused on just auto-attacking until that break meter goes up. And some of the spells and stuff like that will actually make it so that you can break them faster and stuff like that. It says it in the descriptions of the skills and stuff like that, so you can learn which ones do it. I'm not going to spoil it for you and stuff like that. But yeah, and there's different elements and things like that as well. But again, you don't really focus too much on it. Like, it's not really that big of a focus. Oh my god, I am sucking it up. Also, if your main party leader dies and you don't have a revive item that I just used there, you will end up just dying. So you'll just get kicked back to the menu. So that's also a little bit annoying. You can't just switch party members if your leader ends up dying, which is, again, a little bit annoying. I'll play as Blonde for whatever reason, because all my party members are dying. I literally just played this like 3 days ago and did perfectly fine and had no issues with it. So I'm screwing up because I'm talking. But the game also has a bunch of different buffs and stuff like that. And when you go into multiplayer, that's actually fairly interesting because, oh, I haven't set up her skills. Oh, Jesus Christ. This is terrible. You can see some of the other gameplay elements of the game, which is so, whoa, what is that? Oh, surrounded, resurrection's better. Recovery, feel force. So yeah, here's a bunch of different buffs and stuff like that. You know what? I'm not going to play Blanc because I don't want to set up all of her skills. I'll just switch back to Neptune, right? Oh, Neptune just died on me. Gosh dang it. All right, fine. I'll play Noir. Swap her out of danger. 1 second. I wasn't expecting everyone to die real quick. Oh, and I think my recording crashed. Oh, nope, there it goes. Oh, no, my controller died. Gosh dang it, why does this happen every single time I'm recording? I'll be right back. Alright, so sorry about that. Hopefully these batteries work. I actually had to go... Oh, crap. Which ones are these the ones that were in use? Oh, my God. Now I have, like... I have a bunch of batteries on my freaking desk, and I don't know which ones I just replaced the good batteries with, so I don't know which ones of these are dead. Anyway, sorry about that. I wasn't expecting that. I could just play with the mouse and keyboard, which is actually how I got out of that situation. So the mouse and keyboard options actually work perfectly fine. One thing I forgot to mention with the controls, and I completely forgot about this because I don't play with the mouse and keyboard. The inverted controls, so the mouse is actually inverted, but the gamepad isn't, which is super bizarre. Yeah, so that's a little bit annoying if you want to end up trying to swap through them. And I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't, because I prefer the controller here. Also, I have a unicorn stick on Noir. I forgot to add that weapon. They have some ridiculous weapons in here as well. But that basically covers up most of the gameplay stuff. Some of the bosses of that, like my main complaint on the bosses and things is the fact that some of them are pretty just grindy. And it does end up running into a situation where you're just kind of beating at them over and over again. Some of the mini bosses as well. Like there's many bosses on the map and stuff like that. So for example, Big Metal Doggo, this is just one of the, like everyone that knows Neptunia franchise knows of those guys. But basically they're just grindy enemies that you're supposed to fight over and over again, which is a little bit annoying. So, yeah, I don't know. Some of the gameplay is fun, but it also doesn't last very long. There wasn't a lot really drawing me to keep playing the game, and since it did end up running into me, either I was spamming items that recover SP, or I was just sitting there auto-attacking endlessly, because I don't feel like the SP regen from attacking is quite enough. Now, there is an awaken mode to where once you end up attacking enough, you end up building up this meter down at the bottom left. And so when you're actually, you know, attacking bosses and things like that, you'll build that up and you can go into awaken mode, which actually just increases your damage and stats and stuff like that. And then you also have an awaken skill, which you don't unlock until level 70, which means that pretty much after you beat the game is when you're going to end up unlocking that. Or if you play a little bit longer, I don't know. I really didn't focus on it. Another thing about the gameplay is that charge skills don't actually charge into an enemy unless you focus on them, which can be a little bit of a tactics thing. But again, it's just a little bit of annoying. And there's some polish issues here and there, like gameplay. Sometimes you'll get stuck on environments and things like that, so you'll have to attack to kind of get stuck or get out of a jump animation, which is a little bit annoying. I don't think I can do it here on this map. And there's specific spots to where visually, I enjoy the game's visuals. They're a little bit basic in certain maps. Like this map isn't particularly amazing looking. I'll just go ahead and... Oh, actually, I think the boss here would be a spoiler, so I won't show the boss here. But yeah, some of the designs are a little bit bare, but some of the maps are actually pretty and stuff like that, but there is very, very limited of them. And so, for example, this map's kind of bare. But if you actually go into other maps and stuff like that, I'll only show one more map because I don't want to show off too many maps. Where's another one? I guess I'll go to... Let's go to Hasty Crater. But yeah, there's not a lot of like variety in the area types and stuff like that. So like there's the cannon area and then there's the lovely areas of that. So like some of the visual effects and stuff like that look actually pretty dang good, but I prefer the green areas as well. Actually, I'll show one more area off because I actually like it. I just have to remember which one it is. Also, they'll have somewhat tougher enemies. Frick, I don't remember which one it was. Actually, I don't see it on the map. Is it this one? It might be this one. I think it might be this one. There might be other areas that you unlock later on in post-game stuff. Oh, it is this one. I love this map. This map is beautiful. So I'll play on this map. But yeah, so that's most of the gameplay. The gameplay is fun, it's enjoyable, but it also doesn't have a lot of staying power, and the story kind of adds into that. Going into the story and stuff like that, this is focused on the characters of the Neptunia franchise are playing the beta for Four Goddesses Online, or a new one specifically. If you've actually heard that name, if you've played the previous Neptunia games quite a bit, because it's an MMO that Noir, or not Noir, Vert talks about a lot. I don't know why I started there. This video is turning out to be a travesty. Sorry about that. But yeah, so they ended up talking about it quite a bit. And so you actually get to play that. And so the characters are able to kind of create their characters and play kind of a mix of roles. So they kind of like switch it up and stuff like that. And so that's kind of the interesting part of the story. And it kind of has this 2-arc story. So where there's the first arc that focuses on sort of a semi-serious thing. But during that, there's also the actual arc of the game. So you actually have the story of the MMO going on, while you also have the main arc of the game going on. So there's some stuff that happens to game betas and stuff like that. I won't spoil it or anything, but it has to do with Kiri and Princess that you actually saw early on in like the intro and things like that to the game and stuff like that. And so it actually has some interesting stuff on it, but it is fairly short and doesn't really have a lot to it. And even that sort of focuses on side stories. And I mentioned earlier, the game does have a lot of focus on side stories, and that's where most of the story comes from. And so most of it's going to be like just finding those little icons and talking to characters to where they're like, oh yeah, I used to play this game and do this, or I used to do this, or like there's this thing that happens in the world or whatever. It's like, oh, I'm working on this. And it's just kind of like small little side story stuff that kind of goes into it. And it's very lighthearted. There's not a lot of seriousness to this game, and it's very, very, very light. And a lot of people are going to enjoy that, and most of the Neptunia games are light, but even for a Neptunia game, this felt very, very light and very lacking of serious content. And there was like some moments where it's like, we need to be hasteful and stuff like that, but it really didn't have a sense of urgency or really any sense to it to where it was like, oh my god, I gotta do this quickly or anything like that. And it just kind of felt like it was there, but really wasn't a focus of the game, which is fine because the gameplay is fun enough. It just isn't going to justify a full buying price for most people. So keep that in mind, that it does feel like it was a bit bare. If you're a Neptunia fan, you'll probably enjoy it just because the characters are nice and you end up getting that Neptunia kind of feel to it. But overall, it was just kind of meh for the most part. It was enjoyable and I liked it, but not everyone is going to think that. And when it comes down to seriousness, it wasn't serious whatsoever. And so it just feels like that. But I did kind of like how the game did have like these little side stories. And when you end up going into it, it's like, oh, hey, we should go do this. And then when you go into that area, you'll actually find little side story events and things like that. And you'll actually get more into it. And so it does go into a little bit more. And there's actually a side story or two that I'm actually missing and stuff like that. You can actually check your side story progress within the game. Won't show it for spoiler reasons. You can actually check where you're at in the game and stuff like that for those side of side stories. And so you end up going into it and it's like, oh, hey, you know, there's a side story with this or whatever, and I should go to this area and do this. And when you're doing the quest, you'll unlock more of them and stuff. And so there is a fair amount of them. And they actually go into like specific characters and their interactions within the game and stuff like that. So it is kind of nice to see. But again, it's not main story content and it isn't serious. And so it doesn't really feel like it just feels extra rather than part of the game, which again is fine if you're into that. But if you're not into that, it's gonna feel pretty bare. So again, it's not the most in-depth story or whatever. And even then, the main story was very, very predictable. Not that Neptunia games are known for like having super advanced story that no one could ever see coming. And you know, they're fairly predictable most of the time. But this game especially, it's like, oh, this is happening? Really? This is gonna happen next, isn't it? And then 2 scenes later it happens. And you're like, well, I knew that was coming. So like, if you know anything about MMOs, you're gonna know exactly what happens. One of the gameplay bugbears I did mention or didn't mention before as well is that when you kill enemies, there's a small animation hiccup. It hasn't been happening too much, but when you kill an enemy, sometimes if they're in an animation, they'll kind of get stuck for a second. And when they die, they're supposed to fly back or do animations and stuff like that. But in this one, I didn't actually go in. There it goes. Okay. Again, some of the gameplay and stuff like that is a little bit buggy, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. But yeah, so there's a animation hitching here and there to where you'll kill an enemy and then they'll sit there for a second without playing their death animation. And sometimes, especially early on, I got used to it later on and I learned to target on and things like that. But yeah, sometimes they just die and they just kind of sit there. But overall, my overall impressions of the game are fairly decent. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. And it's still one of those games I might pick up every once in a while just to kind of play it. There's a lot of games on my catalog, so I probably won't end up going back to it. And it's not a game that had a lot of staying power. One of the reasons it took me so long to do a review is because I had the game and I was like, oh yeah, it's fun to play, but there was no kind of draw to play it. Like, for enjoyable as the game is, it is fairly simple, and it doesn't really scratch any itches that I've been desiring for the most part. It is one of those kind of, like, play through it once, and that's pretty much all you got, but there is a lot of extra content, and if this is the type of gameplay that you want, it is kind of like one of those games that you can just kind of chill out and play every once in a while. Oh yeah, I should awaken, by the way. I should have saved up to use her awakening skill, but this boss is about to die anyway, so I won't be showing any of those off. And again, you don't unlock them into endgame, and so it's like a little bit unfortunate, but I think you have to have full SP to do it anyways. And so can I get full SP real quick? Oh, dang it, it ran out. Anyways, yeah, there are special skills. But yeah, my overall impressions of the game are pretty good. I actually enjoyed it a lot, but again, it has those major issues to where it's not a particularly amazing game. Did I finish any quests? I did, yay. I don't know if that's going to unlock any story and stuff like that. I can show off a little bit of the visual element style stuff as well. Like, I'll just show off a little bit of the early game, or we can go into a map and stuff like that and show off another one. I'm not going to because that's spoiler territory. But, yeah, so it's a fairly decent game. It's just not amazing. So don't expect the world from it. Expect a Neptunia spin-off game. But when it comes down to the Neptunia franchise and their spin-off games, this is probably one of the higher quality ones. I think the, Sega Hard Girls one was like also another good contender, but that one also had a bunch of issues. I also have a review for that one as well, and that's my other one that I actually enjoyed a lot. But that was a JRPG, where this one is actually an action RPG, and it's actually cool to see the Neptunia games, because the Neptunia games have always kind of had a lot of action into it, and they talk about, you know, doing a lot of crazy stuff, and in this game you actually get to do that, which is pretty dang cool. So for Neptunia fans, this game is definitely like one that you'll want to look at or put on your wish list and like look for a sale or something like that to pick up. It just lacks a lot of content, and for people that aren't into the Neptunia franchise, while it's a fun action RPG, it just doesn't have enough for me to justify recommending it, and that's kind of a big slash to it, because again, while it's enjoyable, it doesn't have a lot, so it's hard to recommend for that reason. I'll recommend it to people who are willing to spend that much for, you know, a spin-off game and actually looking for more Neptunia, and people who like action RPGs. It is a decent pickup, but again, keep in mind that it's going to be lacking content. There's going to be bugginess, and it's not an amazing game or anything like that. It's a pretty average game that has some nice aesthetic, has some nice smooth gameplay here and there. Just expect some bugginess here and there, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, my overall thoughts, I think I recommend it, but at the same time, it's pretty hard to recommend. So it's a cautious recommendation from me. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this one. If you like my styles of content, you can check out my website at michaelpstanich.com. Link in the description, as well as a link to our gaming Discord called The Broken Chat Box. If you want to try and play multiplayer, a few of us in the Broken Chat Box have it, but most of us are probably going to ignore it. I probably won't come back to this game after this just because I have so many. Maybe I will every once in a while, because it is a fun game to just kind of relax and go into it. Even though it is lacking content, there is a lot of like post-game content that's enjoyable, and so I might go through I think the level cap is like 200 or something like that, so I'm only on level 70. Although people do say you stop unlocking things at level 100, and so I might run out of stuff to do. I don't know, but it is enjoyable to play around with. I just wish the game was a little bit more difficult for me personally, and I wish I had a little bit more depth to its story, because, you know, the Neptunia games, while they're not like the best stories ever, I do enjoy their kind of comical nature, and I do like seeing that inside of its kind of like self-awareness and stuff like that. So yeah, other than that, like I said, make sure to like the videos and stuff like that. That does help me a lot, and make sure to subscribe and recommend it to your friends and stuff like that. I am having trouble growing and things like that, like everyone else on YouTube these days. So if you are watching to this very end, that probably shows that you did like the video and you do like my style of the content. So please do end up throwing me a like and do subscribe. I do appreciate it a lot, and I am definitely struggling with everything on YouTube right now, and I'm also uploading all my stuff to Twitch. So if you're watching this on Twitch, do the same on Twitch, because I'm struggling pretty much everywhere. So apologies for bringing that up. I normally don't, but I thought I'd bring it up here, and I'll probably end up bringing it up on most of my reviews, because it is a struggle I'm going on to. And I am actually working on a game in Unreal Engine 4, so follow my website and my Twitter stuff for that. Anyways, like I said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And now I'm gonna go murder innocent birds and flowers. Yay.